Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
There are many new realities in our lives now, and of our public and professional life, transportation and moving around, not just our towns, but the state and the region, are important. In North Carolina, the Old North State runs and owns one of the largest state-maintained highway systems in the country. It's more than 80,000 miles of roads. In addition, the Department of Transportation in North Carolina has 98 transit systems in 100 counties. It has 72 public airports, not to mention the 500 private airports. It has the second largest ferry system. It runs the Department of Motor Vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. In a moment, we are joined by the Secretary of Transportation for North Carolina, Eric Boyette, starts our discussion with us, and we hope you'll stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an executive profile featuring Eric Boyette, Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Transportation.
And welcome back to this very special executive profile. With us now, Department of Transportation Secretary Eric Boyette. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the dialogue, and congratulations on the relatively new job.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Glad to be here.
You know, it's interesting. As you started in the very beginning of the year, it was before COVID-19, this novel coronavirus that has now become our new reality, really had taken hold as being a threat. And about a week and a half after you started your job, sir, it became apparent that it was going to be a serious threat. Most that start new jobs have the luxury of taking time and listening and observing and traveling to all the offices and talking to all your colleagues. You really didn't have that time. So as you hit the ground running, Your Honor, what is job one? How do you reflect on those early days?
Sure. I think, you brought up a great point. I always say that, between any job that I've taken on, I always look at the first 100 days. What is the first 100 days that I want to assess and look at changes or, things that are working well, things we do need to change. So obviously I did not have that ability. After about 10 working days, our COVID hit, and we had to really look at, it shifted our focus really initially to funding because of our funding streams that we have from our motor fuels tax, and people were not traveling. So really, it really shifted my, first thought of what I wanted to do in office when I first started as, back to, we really got to make sure we're providing, the services we have for our citizens, making sure we're financially solid.
When you look at, and I know you have history with the Department of Transportation in North Carolina, Your Honor, but as you look at it a little bit differently now, you've got, and forgive me, but I'm going to, for the sake of our viewers, $5 billion budget, almost 10,000 employees, 80,000 of roads, almost 70 plus airports that are owned by the state or public owned, in addition to the 500 airports, seaports, the ferry system, of course, DMV, And the list goes on and on and on. This is a major organization that touches the lives of every Carolinian. I think that's fair to say. So when you look at this, how do you think about what DOT has traditionally been and how should it be now, given the real questions around what revenue are going to look like now going forward because of gas tax, because of COVID, because of layoffs, et cetera, et cetera. So, Your Honor, if you will, unfold what this new reality in DOT looks like.
Sure. I think it's a great question. You brought up some things that people may not know about, transportation, as far as, different states manage different types of modes. And we do cover, a lot of ground throughout our state with, our ports, as you mentioned. We also have our turnpike. We have, our UTP out in Kinston. So, we have a lot of modes that we do cover. And with funding, you brought up a great point about the lack of funding that we're seeing through motor fuels and the federal fuels. So, the tax pieces from those. But, we continue to look at, what can we do to make sure that we're serving our citizens and making sure, number one, they're safe. That's our number one priority, make sure that safety is number one. But we also are looking at, are we organized correctly? What are some things that we can do to be more efficient? They're the things that, when now we're looking at, what does our stabilization of funding look like? And, what types of funding do we need? Our current funding, will it meet our demands in the future? We have an NC First Commission that, I was glad to see it was in place when I arrived. It's really looking at alternatives for our revenue streams. They have a report that's due to us and to me in December. And I'm looking forward to that because I think that helps us shape our future. What does it look like and how can we meet the demands of our public, from our transit to, you see a lot of the different types of modes now that, Free Enterprise is bringing up with our, the mobility of, you have the different modes of, you have your birds, you have your lines, you have all of that springing up within the municipalities. And how do we support that and help the municipalities in any way that we can? So there's a lot of reach there that we have. Our ports is very important. Aviation, you mentioned them all. Highways, obviously, we have to make sure that we're moving goods and services back and forth for our citizens. It's become very evident during COVID. We noticed that, we did have a decrease in traffic. But we also had an uptick in, freight traffic because goods and services were being delivered because of demand. So, that did not, decline. So there's still ways that we can look at how do we distribute, that balance across our agency. And we are a large agency. I'm impressed you knew all the numbers, Chris. I'm glad that, I didn't have to repeat those. You did a great job.
Well, I want to go back to the financial side for just a minute, the budgetary issues, and not to rip a Band-Aid off of this, but just in context. So your predecessor, Jim Trogdon, left office in part because of some pressure that he got about what many called overspending. And the point was, so when you started the job, sir, you were in the hole to some degree of about $750 million. So the state DOT had to figure out how to fix that and then go to what you've referred to a couple times now as stability in funding and stability in revenue. So do you have some level of confidence that you've been able to address the issues of the shortfall of the overspending, whatever the reason for that overspending, but you've been able to address that? And how long do you think it is before you get, for you to be comfortable that there's stability in revenue as DOT needs and knows revenue?
So I think, you brought up a few good points. One, I wouldn't consider it overspending. I think that's where it's been misclassified because every dollar that was spent for transportation needs. So I've been trying to be very vocal about that. There's not $700 million that was misspent. There were $700 million that were spent for transportation goods. So I want to make sure that's clear. But, the problem we have is if you look at the COVID and, the impact it had on our revenue streams, that's $300 million estimated that we can't get that money back. So we're trying to figure out, how do we fill that void and what does the future look like for us when, we're pushing projects as hard as we can. We have storms, you've heard it all. So how do we balance the future? What does that future look like? How do we increase our revenues or stabilize our revenues? Bonds will be very important for us. As you saw, we're continuing to push our increase of bonds, but we also have to increase our maintenance reserves so we can continue to maintain the roads that we have. So it's going to take a few cycles for us to understand, where we are. And every month there's something that every day I get up every morning, I look at, we have dashboards that, we have information that I look at every day to make sure I see where we are. And it helps me understand the revenue streams and our expenditure streams to understand where we are, where are we headed. We have forecasting that we use. So I think all the tools that we're actually pulling together now, and not just focusing on one area. When you mentioned about our agency, we can't just focus on one area. We got to focus on all of our modes and making sure that it's a transportation focus, not just a highway focus or a mode focus on, like our turnpike or, our aviation or rail. So understanding that methodology is what we have to have.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think about the revenue sources, and these are, of course, rough, Mr. Secretary, but you get 75% of the total rev from the state of North Carolina, and you get up roughly 25% of that from U.S. Federal government. How much have those declined in percentage-wise, and how long do you see it before those get at least back to some normalization?
So the federal side has not declined. We're just seeing possibility of decline based on the federal piece of our gas tax, which as you mentioned, that 25% goes to our capital funding. So all of our federal side goes 100% to our capital funding for new road construction. The 75% that you mentioned from the state funding is where we had the split, and that's where we're seeing the decline. The decline in the motor fuels tax at the pump. And we're seeing that decline was heavily in the first probably 3 to 5 weeks in March. And, we've seen that the traffic, the ADT and the VMT, the vehicles mile travel, is starting to increase again. So we were about 3 to 5% below pre-COVID numbers on our vehicle miles traveled. Our ADTs, higher. So we're starting to see that come back. Our motor fuels revenue is starting to, our motor fuels revenue, we see for May, if we see in April, May, and May, we'll see in June. So revenues we collect in May, we'll see in June. So it's normally a month behind. So it takes us a few months to understand exactly where we are on that curve. But the percentages, if you notice, that's something that we really have focused on because of the drop in traffic. That's where we've had to make sure, when we see that, we have to start, we pull our foot off the accelerator to, pull projects back. The things we don't want to do, because that's what, it's what accelerates our economy in North Carolina. So, 70% of our, funding we put people to work. So that's what, it upsets us when we have to, pull our foot off the accelerator, but we have to be responsible and do that at times.
Are there a handful, or are there some high profile projects that you've had to put on hold because of this?
I say they're all high profile because I don't want to pick and choose which ones are where. I mean, we do a balanced approach. It's one thing that I really, I worked on when I was here previously is, we changed the way we actually select projects to be selected. So, the data behind how we select projects is what we use. It's not the way it used to be in the old days where, you'd have different board members that would pick a project. That's not what we do now. We have data that selects the projects. And so to me, they're all important. They're all high profile because if they weren't, we wouldn't be doing the work. So I want to make sure, that we're balanced and we're making sure that we push the projects forward as fast as we can for North Carolina. But I also want to make sure we get maintenance money to continue to maintain the projects that we are delivering. So the new road construction, we've got to continue to maintain those projects.
And this is anecdotal, sir, but when we look around the state, when we look at driving down the highways, and the highways have always had beautiful landscapes like the wildflowers in North Carolina. South Carolina is a lot the same way, but now when you drive down the road, you see high grass, you see more potholes, you see some of those things that look unfinished around projects. How many of those will be on hold? How long do you see that type of the spirit of the non-maintenance going on?
Mm-hmm. So, that was one of the things when you mentioned the grass, we cut back from 6 cycles to 4 cycles. So we did that as far as the cost savings. That's something we did. And I don't know if you notice now we are back. We are, it's part of that cycle that we have come back. So it goes back to revenue streams. We are balancing, our budget just like any other agency would. And if that requires us to, stop performing some of our duties, a lot of our programs we love. I mean, there's 2 programs that to me is the future for transportation where, it's our internship that we have and also our HBCUs that we have. So, those internships, to me, that's the future of our department. And when we have to cut those programs, not only, no one sees that. That's not a pothole. That's not, seeing the grass grow. That's internally that we've had to cut. There's a lot of those that we've had to do, furloughing our employees, things like that we've had to do to, maintain our budget. And that's what we'll continue to do. But as we see our revenue streams, increasing, as we see, bond sales, things like that we can actually, receive additional revenue, that's when we'll be able to, put more of the projects back on the list and we are continuing any safety item, as I mentioned, we're making sure. I know we had some calls around some of the grass that was high at some of the intersections, and we made sure that people understand, hey, if you have any sight distance issues, please reach out and make sure we're aware. Because safety is always first. We have to be safe, but we don't do anything else for our public.
You mentioned the bonds and the debt in the state is waiting for revenue, and Build NC was a big part of reorganizing the way the DOT could access those revenue and do it a lot quicker and get the money to the shovel-ready project, so to speak.
Right.
Is there, how much, I'm not going to ask this, right, Mr. Secretary, but how much powder is still left dry in that Build NC initiative and the ability to use that program?
Oh, we're continuing. We have projects that, we're ready, to your point, that are shovel ready that we need to push out. Delivering, and selling of those bonds are very important for our capital program. That's something that, we're very proud of, and we want to make sure we continue to push, those bond sales as quick as we can, because that is another revenue stream that we can have come in. Obviously, we have to repay the bonds, but we get a good return and we do a great job on those bond sales.
Here we are approaching our stride in the middle of the Carolina summer. That's always been a very exciting time, a lot of travel. This year, It's a little bit different. How do you look at the travel season, not just on the surface roads, Your Honor, but when you look across the platform of DOT and you see that there's a difference in the rate of emplaning going through Charlotte, Douglas, and Raleigh and some of those places, do you see a dramatic uptick in road travel during tourist season, or what are your observations?
So, obviously this week will tell us, but I can tell you, I have communication with one of the airlines about their ridership. Is something that we're concerned about, because obviously that's another one of our partners that we work with. So we talked to that airline about their ridership and what are they seeing. They are seeing an increase in ridership. As everyone else, they're trying to do it safely. They're trying to make sure they clean and they have social distancing. And we're doing the same on our routes, with our ferry routes and our transit routes on our trains. So, having to balance that with ridership increasing is going to be a challenge. But we are seeing ridership increasing, not only in cars, but also in trains and our ferry system. So in airlines, they're seeing it too. I know they're not seeing it as quick as they want it, and none of us are, but I think the increase is there, but it's going to go back to, the social distancing and making sure that, our numbers are where they should be, and just continuing to fight on COVID. But everybody has to do their part to make that happen. So I'm just hoping we do that, because, we don't want to see a downturn again, because that would be another, devastation for our agency that, we just don't want to see.
One of the divisions of, as you've mentioned, is the North Carolina port system. Paul Koza has been highly regarded and highly lauded for, wouldn't say turning it around, but stabilizing the ports to a point where they've had their best year. As he announced his retirement at the end of this year, Mr. Secretary, how do you reflect, and as you took the reins this year, how do you reflect on what the ports should be? And I say that, I'm sorry for this long question, sir, but I say that in reference to one of the strongest ports in the country is the South Carolina port. So how How should the North Carolina and the South Carolina and the general Carolina port systems be working together or thinking about each other in a kind of respective way?
You know, and I think with all ports in general, I think, you know, and to your point, Paul has done a great job. I'm looking forward to Brian. Brian will really do a great job right behind Paul. Looking forward to working with, you know, Brian more. But the ports in general, they do work together. They are independent. You know, they're, you know, it's just like a business. They have to make money. But I think they share ideas and they look at functions that they could work on. But it's like a business, so they really have to be independent. So I don't think there's a way, you know, currently they can share any type of ideas or, you know, opportunities to work together. There's a lot of, you know, goods that are being moved in and out of our port that we're proud of. And, you know, we've just received one of the largest vessels in our port. That, you know, we had a lot of work done to be able to receive, you know, that largest vessel from, you know, overseas. So it's really, that part is exciting to us, you know, to be able to compete with some of the other ports. I think that's really where, you know, bringing those goods in and having that, you know, that traffic moving in and also having those services move very quickly for some of our residents and some of our businesses. You know, they rely on that port. But, you know, you bring up a good idea about the sharing between the ports. I just don't know if that'll ever happen because it's a business. You know, it is a business where, you know, they have a revenue, they have a profit margin they need to make. And so they're continuing to look at how do I, you know, bring more business to my port versus any of the other ports north or south of us. So I would love for it to be some sort of consortium, but I don't know that we'll ever see that happen.
One of the, as you well know, the single largest funding from the General Assembly in both Carolinas is education. Education Sure. And the decision about what a school year looks like is very fungible at this point, and it seems like we'll not have any hard and fast decision from either governor until we get much closer to the start date. How does DOT factor in? How do you think about pivoting and be flexible enough to know that, well, if there are virtual schools, then we're going to have to pull this lever and DOT is going to have to do this, given that a lot of traffic changes when schools go in session or not in this case?
Right. You know, I think we're seeing that today. So our models that we're looking at for revenue are not predicting any school traffic increase. We're using our models that we're seeing today based on, you know, current traffic. We're looking at trends from the past to see where we are today. And we're looking at today's traffic as the new normal. So that's what we're doing in our revenue models and trying to make sure that we're staying consistent. One of the things for us as far as relating to schools would be on the DMV side, because we do work with our school bus drivers on, you know, certifications. So that may change. So there's some things there that we would probably have to adjust to be able to help. It may take some, you know, some of the pressure off of our DMV staff not having as many school bus drivers to certify. But, you know, there's a lot of things like that. But the travel itself, to your point, you know, we'll still see travel, but it may not be as heavy for certain areas.
The role of secretary of an agency is not new to you, sir. You had the similar role at Department of Information Technology for North Carolina, and one of the responsibilities for DIT, as they call it in North Carolina, was the idea of broadband access. A lot of talk about broadband access since COVID-19 has dominated because of the great democratization, and I'm not saying that right, but the leveling of the playing field for folks on broadband access. So you're in a unique way where you've got the hard assets of DOT, but you also understand broadband access. How does it look to you that broadband will manifest itself in North Carolina in a much more progressive way now that we're in this new reality? How does this work?
Yeah, and you're mentioning the digital divide. So you've got areas where, you know, we have broadband access and areas we do not, or we don't have, you know, the level of broadband that we should have in certain areas. So, you know, just one of the things that when I was Secretary of DIT, that, you know, Secretary Trotman and I worked on together was a dig once policy. So it allows the transportation department, as we're working on roadways, we have areas that, you know, we have possibilities of adding, some channeling in for, later on, we may have vendors come in and be able to use some of our open channels so they can put in fiber or whatever type of material comes next.
Mhm.
But that's something that we want to do, continue to help and support. But broadband in general is something that, you're absolutely correct. It came to light, and it's something that we continue to look for opportunities. We had an infra grant around I-95 and US 70 to allow us, this department, transportation department, to install fiber and kind of help prepare and have a backbone for the future. So there's ways like that that we can continue to help. Our providers are constantly, we're constantly in contact with them around encroachments, things that we can work on together to help speed that process up. But the future may not be in the ground, the future may be in the air. So how do we look at satellite technologies that can help us? In other words, a bill passed.
Well, Your Honor, I hate to interrupt you because I know you're good. Kind of tore off the Band-Aid of this one, and this is a big one. But thank you for being on our program. Thanks for taking the job. I know a lot of people are rooting for you, and best of luck going forward.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Chris.
Thank you. And thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris Williams. Stay safe and hope your business is good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you.